Good evening, everybody. This is Scott Reed, your host for the Flock Talk, the podcast from Duck Sports Authority. We are joined, as always, by Drew Davis, our go-to guy for all Oregon football stuff. And then we're also joined today by Big Ten Ted. We thought it'd be a good name to bring in today with everything going on. You know, we've got the Rose Bowl coming up. It's technically a Big Ten matchup, but it's also really a nostalgia trip because it's also Pac-12/Big Ten. And the Rose Bowl, people got to be drooling over this concept. First, I'm going to say, Drew, how was your holiday?
It was great, excellent. Ate some good food, had a couple presents, so I cannot complain.
That's always good. We had my company gives us Honey Baked ham gift cards every year, so we always do ham for Christmas since we don't really want to cook turkey another 30 days later. But it was good. Ted, how was your holiday this week?
Oh, it was great. It was great. All kinds of stuff to do with the family on Christmas Eve and Christmas as well. So it was fun. Of course, a lot of family members have kind of been watching what I'm doing, and they've been seeing a lot of the positive reaction from the Duck fans. Got some Duck apparel actually for Christmas, so that was kind of cool, celebrating their inaugural year in the conference. So yeah, it was a fantastic Christmas as usual.
Inaugural year, and of course, first Big Ten championship for the team in their first year in the conference. So I'm going to start. I want to start because, and we'll start. I think Ted, you're going to have some knowledge of these guys. Dylan Thieneman, the transfer from Purdue. You know, people talk about him. Oh, he's a freshman All-American. He was also an actual third-team All-American as a true freshman. He's just one of those guys that I really loved watching him play, even against Oregon. You could tell that he had something special, and he didn't have maybe the talent in front of him that would have made him really stand out, like a Caleb Downs or some of these other guys that stand out. What do you think about Dylan and kind of what you've seen from him?
No, he's all over the field. He's got great range as a safety. He does so well playing the thirds back there in the secondary via the pass. And then, there's this, when you look at a Dylan Thieneman highlight film, when he's playing against the run, when run plays are kind of going to the outside, he just takes great angles. He's always in the right spot, right? It always seems like he's a very disciplined safety. So he's really fun to watch on film. You know, he's really fast. And like you mentioned, at Purdue, let's call a spade, not a lot of talent in front of him, you know. So I think the thing with Dylan and what he felt and why he was all over the field, right? Over 100 tackles his freshman year, over 200 tackles his first 2 years at Purdue, right? His freshman and sophomore season is, you know, he kind of felt like he had to do a lot, right? And a lot of plays got to his level, right? So he had to come up and make tackles where obviously they didn't have the talent in the front seven to be able to do that and find the football, sniff out the football like Dylan was able to do. Now he's kind of coming into a system where it's like, oh, these guys are pretty good. So maybe I don't have to do as much. It's going to be a little bit of an odd adjustment, but it certainly is an adjustment. I think that Dylan's going to have to make, and I'm sure it's not one that he's very welcome to be able to make with this talent in front of him. But yeah, this is you know, when you look at Oregon and their depth chart, right? There are a lot of guys exhuming their eligibility after this year, a very senior laden and senior. It's kind of a, you know, with the fifth year guys and sixth year guys, it's maybe not what senior used to be, but I think we all kind of know what I'm talking about there. But just a lot of guys, you know, being lost, and then of course Oregon has done a pretty solid job these last couple of years recruiting, some of these other kids. You look at the Aaron Flowers, Peyton Woodyard, and some of these other guys that they've been able to get the last 2 years. And, you know, are they going to be up to speed and be at that type of starting level? Maybe. But being able to go out and get a Dylan Thieneman, and then maybe we'll talk about Theron Johnson a little bit later, but being able to get those guys with that experience gives maybe those younger guys an extra year. So when they become sophomores, when they become juniors, they're certainly ready to get into that starting spot because they've seen these experienced great players like Dylan Thieneman at that higher starting level.
And I think one of the things that stands out for me is in the Big Ten especially, you've got to have a really good safety because it seems like all of the elite teams have a really good tight end. You need somebody to cover a Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland, and I don't know that Oregon quite had that this year. Loveland went off against Oregon, even though Michigan wasn't very good in that game, and Tyler Warren really could have had his way if they had found more ways to get him the ball. And they just, you know, Kobe Savage did a good job. They brought in Kingston Lopa for Tyler Warren. He's a true freshman, and he did okay, but they need that guy like Dylan Thieneman, I think, to help with that part of the game. That's something I think the Pac-12 overlooked. You know, when you're in the Pac-12, you don't have the same kind of tight end talent maybe that the Big Ten has. It's a different type of tight end. and you need a different type of safety. And I think that's something that if they work on his role right, he's going to be really good in this defense because he won't have to be everywhere all at once. He can be assigned his role, and this is what your responsibility is as the quarterback of the defensive backfield. Where are you going to be? What is your responsibility? And you don't have to make up for the cornerback who got beat or the other safety who didn't know where he was supposed to be, or the fact that the quarterback had all day long to pass because you don't have a pass rush and you have to try to blitz 5 and 6 people in order to make that pass rush. So I love Dylan Thieneman. Drew, have you had a chance to watch him play at all?
I have not.
It's really interesting because he was a 3-star out of high school. And it's one of those guys, you look at his pictures as a junior and you're thinking, this guy doesn't look like a freshman All-American safety. He looked young, but he made so much progress during his senior year and then during that transition into college that it was night and day. And that's why sometimes these underrated kids, you get them that senior year. And that's why I really think that senior year is important for some of these kids. And Dylan Thieneman, I think, is exactly the type of person that senior year of high school made a difference.
Yeah, Dylan is he's certainly something else. And I think one thing that, when you look at where Dylan is now, and then when you kind of look at Oregon's progression, I think this is something that I kind of researched a little bit a couple of weeks ago when this announcement was made, the progression that they've made at safety, right? A couple of years ago, you're rolling with you're rolling with a Steve Stevens of the world, and now you're progressing all the way up to Dylan Thieneman. That position has progressively gotten better and better and better. Of course, Oregon's a couple of losses to Washington last year, right? It was kind of, of course, that's the entire defensive backfield that gets really played into that as well. But that was kind of their one part, where things maybe fell apart in those 2 games against Washington. But they've certainly made a lot of strides, especially at the safety position in that defensive backfield.
And interesting story. I don't know if you know this, Ted, but Steve Stevens and Jevon Holland were in the same class. Jevon Holland, who's with the Dolphins now, and they were actually good friends. And Steve Stevens was rated higher than Jevon Holland early on after junior year because he had already hit the certain things. But some friends of mine and I went to the opening in 2017 and watched. And I looked at everybody around me and said, that guy's a superstar. I don't know why he's a 3-star at this point. That guy is a superstar in the making. And Steve Stevens is a good kid. He worked hard, but he had his ceiling and he was playing against it. And I think you're right. When you're progressing from Steve Stevens to now Peyton Woodyard and Dylan Thieneman, that's a completely different level of safety. I think Oregon loses 6 defensive backs out of this class. And I think it's telling to me that they're only right now at this point looking at taking 2 in the portal. What that tells me is they really like who's coming back, but they need that leadership. And that leads us to the second guy, Theron Johnson. He's not going to be one of those guys that blows you away with All-American stats, but he's going to be a solid cover corner. I like what I see from him. He's got good speed. He's got good hips. He's all those things that you need from a cornerback. He's got, and he's got leadership. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is you need a leader in that cornerback room because you're losing Jabbar Muhammad. You're losing Dante Manning, who's a 5th-year senior. You're losing Nico Reed, who's a senior. You're losing a lot of talent at the corner. And I think you need somebody like a Theron Johnson. You've probably seen him play a lot more in Northwestern than I have, right?
Yeah, he's like you said, you kind of hit it on the money there. He's solid. He's reliable. Yeah, he's not going to be a first-round NFL draft pick, certainly by any means, but he's someone you can really count on. You don't get a ton of blown assignments. He started every game for Northwestern the last 2 years. Obviously that not this year, of course, Northwestern didn't have as much success, but you look at the past year, right, where they kind of surprised everybody and ended up going 7-5 of the regular season, winning that bowl game against Utah to go to 8-5. The defense was a big part of that success during that season, and Theron Johnson has been and you want, when you look at your corners, when you look at your DBs, you want to have a little bit of peace of mind, right? Especially in some of these passing situations. I think Theron Johnson certainly gives you that. You mentioned the leadership, and that's kind of what I was kind of connecting with some of these younger guys, right? That they've been able to bring in high 4-star, 5-star type of guys in the defensive backfield. This is a good bridge year, right? We talked about Thieneman at safety, and then you talk about Theron Johnson over there at corner, where some of these younger guys, whether they're freshmen or whether they're sophomores, they can learn from these guys that have started multiple games, right? 2 seasons worth. Both of these guys within the Big Ten, they've seen it all, they've done it all, certainly at that, and then they can kind of use that, and now these younger guys can kind of learn as they can, because these younger guys, man, I know you kind of cover it all over there at the site, and you watch these guys, and they've brought in a lot of talent these last 2 years at defensive back. We mentioned Peyton Woodyard. Of course, you've got Trey McKnight coming in at safety in this class, a 5-star guy. So being able to learn from those kind of guys that have been there and done that in the Big Ten, I think it's going to provide a ton of dividends when we get to maybe later in 25, when you really start to see maybe these younger guys get in certain packages, and then especially when you get to 2026, when these guys are maybe asked to start into some starting roles.
Yeah, and there is one benefit. Jaleel Florence, who's missed most of this year in recovery from an ACL injury from last year, is also due to be back. And he was a starting corner last year on that team that got hurt during the Washington game, and that was a big part of the Washington loss. So you bring him back. You've got Ife Obadegwu back there. You've got Naeem Offord coming in. You've got Dorian Brew coming in. There's a lot of talent at corner, a lot of talent at safety. And I really, again, I think it speaks volumes that the coaches are not bringing in 4, 5, and 6 more portal guys to replace who's leaving. It says we trust the guys we have, but we need a couple of, it's like chess pieces, right? I don't need to replace every piece on the board. I need a couple more. I need a couple of guys who are a little bit experienced. I need a guy that's like a queen that can get out there and make these plays. That isn't quite there yet, if you're using chess analogy. I just think I really like the way the staff has put this team together over the years. And then, Theron Johnson, I think, is perfect with his leadership. So let us turn to the topic of the week. We're going to start talking about the Rose Bowl preview. And I think, probably you guys watched it too, the Ohio State-Tennessee game. Maybe there was some amazement at what they did. They came out, and that was probably, especially the first 3 drives, I think that's the best I've seen Ohio State play all year on offense. And I heard some people say Jekyll and Hyde team because they were referencing back to Michigan. I don't want to go there. And I'll see if you agree with this thought, both of you. I don't think you can call what they did against Michigan, then Tennessee, as Jekyll and Hyde, because Michigan's a rivalry game. And it's one where I think you do throw out the records. It's not like a forced rivalry. This is a heated rivalry with 2 teams that have been elite for a decade. Do I think that maybe Ohio State thought that Michigan was down and that maybe they had this one in the bag? There's that out there. I don't know how much of that was there. But I also don't think Tennessee is as good as we thought they were going in. I saw a lot of flaws in that defense. So, Drew, I'll let you kind of chime in first and see what you saw in that game.
Pretty much, I just want to talk about what you said. Dating back to the Michigan game without bringing it up too much, I think it just had an effect on this game just because they had to hear about it for 3 weeks. They had to hear about, is this Ryan Day's last job? If they lose in the playoffs, is he done with? This is the same class of seniors and upperclassmen who wanted to come back to beat Michigan, who wanted to come back and win a national championship. And so I think after the dust settled and they realized, like, okay, we lost to Michigan for a 4th straight year, but we still have a chance to do what we want to do. And especially playing back at home, a chance to redeem themselves. But with that game, I was very surprised only because they came out throwing the ball very efficiently. They threw for plus 300 yards. They ran for plus 150 yards. It seemed like they couldn't be stopped at all. And knowing what I know about Tennessee, I know they're really good up front on defense as far as being really deep defensively as far as their defensive line. And then offensively, they give the ball to Dylan Sampson 20 to 25 times. But I saw he had an injury early in the game, which I really feel affected it. But you also just saw Nico, just how young he was. It was a big atmosphere to be in against a really good defense. And I just think Ohio State planned, and their players and their coaches stepped up to the challenge for having about 3 weeks to prepare for this game and to get over the hangover that was Michigan.
Yeah, and then from my perspective, that Michigan game was, man, it was so weird. It was so weird to watch. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because, man, it's just, it was, the whole thing really revolved around what Chip was calling running right at the strengths of the Michigan defense, right at those 2 great defensive tackles. And Will Howard throwing a couple of interceptions. Now he has turned the football over a little bit this season, but then you look at that game kind of in a phone booth, and then you look forward to this game against Tennessee, and I'm like, this is a picture perfect game plan. Like this is almost old school Ohio State, if you want to say that, right? When Fields was slinging it with some home run balls and CJ Stroud was getting the ball over the top as well, right? That's when you defended Ohio State. You needed to try to prevent the big play, the home run play over the top. We know the names of the receivers from Olave to Garrett Wilson to Jackson Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., right? We all kind of know those names, and that's kind of what it kind of looked like, right? Because you go down, was at the first drive of the game, you get the great touchdown pass that was his pinpoint accuracy from Will Howard to Jeremiah Smith, and then you get the big play to Emeka Egbuka that sets up a short touchdown. I mean, this is the type of explosion and explosive plays that we expect to see normally from an Ohio State team. Of course, when you look at it last year, you had Kyle McCord, who's a lot better at Syracuse than maybe it was statistically, I should say, at Ohio State last season. But this is kind of the balance, right, that we wanted to see, and it's the explosiveness and the play on the perimeter that we just didn't see against Michigan because they just didn't do it. And that was their advantage. That was kind of the weird thing about that game against Michigan. But, you kind of mentioned Tennessee. I think this game changed a lot when Dylan Sampson was not there. Now, give credit to Nico Imaliava. Man, he tried his best. Man. He was willing them with his mobility, and he was trying to run around and certainly make some plays. But, man, it's just, you mentioned, Ohio State was just – they just outmatched Tennessee on both lines of scrimmage, whether it was their defense getting after it or whether it was their offense protecting and doing some really good things in the run game, whatever it was. It was an Ohio State line of scrimmage type of football game. And as we now look at that performance against Tennessee, there's going to be, now I kind of said it myself, Ohio State appears that they are certainly back to form, championship form, because that Michigan game just feels like such an anomaly. Because if you look at this Ohio State season as a whole, I think a lot of people after that Michigan loss, they just zeroed in on those 60 minutes in Columbus, and they didn't think about anything else as it pertained to the Buckeyes. They didn't think about October 12th at Austin, as you guys know, going down to the wire, maybe a offensive pass interference away from kicking a field goal and winning that thing. And Oregon, number one team in the country, undefeated, right? And that's their only loss of the season. They look convincing, certainly the rest of the way, but there is just some sort of mental block with Ohio State as it pertains to the Michigan Wolverines. So I think this was, as you mentioned, I think they were very motivated going into that game against Tennessee. And they're going to have another kind of motivation, obviously, losing to Oregon, as I mentioned, up there on October 12th, up there at Autzen Stadium. So now it's kind of an interesting spot, right, for Ohio State, right? You kind of at least got the bugaboo that of Michigan, it's Ohio State and Michigan, right? You're not going to totally forget about it, obviously, but it's at least kind of in the rearview mirror. Hey, maybe the fans got a little bit more confidence, Ryan Day, as of now, but now it's a new challenge. You face the best team in the country. These are the two most talented teams in the country, as far as I'm concerned. And now you can't let this. Well, we got Michigan in the rearview mirror now. We're back to normal and get complacent, right? And now you got Oregon in the Rose Bowl, and they've had 3 or 4 weeks off, right? So Ryan Day has to find a way to harness that motivation, right? And not let these guys get complacent. Right. I talked about in my preview, it was all about the mindset between the years. How are they going to come out? And they certainly came out on fire. I think they need to be able to come out on fire against this Oregon team. I know we're going to get into a lot about this game, but it's classic Big Ten. It's classic Pac-10, Pac-8, right? Depends how far back you want to go. Certainly, it's everything. The Rose Bowl and their kind of committee, they were kind of like they were the last ones to really agree to this format, because they're a very traditional group, as you guys know. But man, I'm sure they love this. I'm sure they love this. This is going to be a national championship type of atmosphere between these two teams. In Pasadena, you couldn't ask for anything else.
I was thinking about something, and Drew can probably testify to this. Chip Kelly tends to, on occasion, be stubborn. And I thought the Michigan game, and I'm not going to tell you that I watched every single offensive play that Ohio State ran and charted what the offensive line did. They did a lot of different type of blocking in that game than I've seen them done. It looked like all just old-fashioned, old-school, straight-up blocking, and they were losing those battles. When you're going against Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and those guys, I don't know that you can do it. And then you watch the Tennessee game, the difference when they were pulling guard and tackle from the right side to the left, but then running back to the right side. I don't remember seeing any of that kind of run play against Michigan. It's like they were being stubborn, saying, we're going to beat you at the line of scrimmage. And they didn't. And I think I don't know if that was Chip Kelly's stubbornness. I don't know if that was Ryan Day saying, I don't know where that came from. That was a game plan thing that it just didn't work. And then you watch the difference against Tennessee. And Drew, you can talk about that. The kind of the way that Chip will say, hey, that's a misdirection play. You don't think of that as a misdirection play. You think of, you make a receiver run to one side, and when you take the pulling lineman and run to where they pulled from, that's a Chip Kelly specialty, I think.
I would say, yeah, and the thing I go back to is when I've looked at Ohio State this whole year, I remember they've had a lot of injuries up front. They've been plugging and playing a lot of guys. They've moved a lot of guys around. And so maybe he said, well, we can't just sit here and go straight up with, Michigan when it was. You talked about their interior linemen being the strength of their team. Maybe they tried to fool them a little bit. Maybe they tried to give them a little bit of misdirection, some traps and things like that. Didn't work out for the whole game, weren't able to make adjustments. But that's what happens when you give Chip 3 weeks to prepare for something and a lot of time to look at some film. He's just a great savant at what he does with drawing up plays. And any way you slice it, I think you can look at Ohio State and say they're better at every position against most teams they go against. And they have 2 or 3 NFL wide receivers right now ready to go. And so I just think this time you just saw him say, hey, let's line up and throw a couple goal balls and go get them that way. And then let's give the ball to these 2 guys who have rushed for over 3,000 yards in their career. Like, let's stop out coaching ourselves and let these guys go play.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us to start looking at what we expect when we get to next Wednesday afternoon. It's going to be, we can just call it an epic rematch, because I think a lot of people agree with this thought. Whoever wins this game is probably the national championship favorite. I know that right now they're not, because one of these teams has to get through the other one. But once we get out of this game, I think this probably is the best game of the quarterfinals, and ticket prices reflect that. The ticket prices for the ASU game are like $49 a pop. I spend more than that on a regular season game for Nicholls State. So I think this game should be the best game of the quarterfinals. It should look a lot like it did in October, sort of. Like both coaches said at their opening press conferences for the Rose Bowl, both of these teams are different today than they were 60 days ago. Oregon is different because they've gotten healthier. Ohio State is different because they've had to learn how to do things with new personnel. You've got your All-American guard playing left tackle because your top 2 left tackles are injured. You've got your starting center who transferred in from Alabama out with an Achilles tear. And you're bringing in a guy who last year, basically the reason they brought the center in from Alabama is because last year's center had some struggles with the snaps. Now he's back to snapping the ball. There's a lot of moving pieces. And I think that 3-week gap gave them a chance to get those guys better, to get them ready to play at a level that when you're playing every week, man, it's so hard to sometimes really learn because you're out there. You've got a game plan to put in. You can't really get better at your craft when and you guys know this too. It's hard to get better at your craft when you're out there practicing every week because you've got so many other things going on. That how does Donovan Jackson become a left tackle at the college level when he doesn't have a chance to even really learn how to be a left tackle at the college level? He's a guard, and a really good guard. And I just think they are different. But I looked at the stats for the 6 games after Oregon. What stands out to me, they're better at throwing the ball in the last half of the season than they were in the first half of the season. Quinshon Judkins is not running the ball as well in the second half of the year as even in the first half. He's averaging 4 yards a carry. I think first half of the season he was averaging over 7 yards a carry. So there's a big difference. I don't know if he's beat up or if that's the line, because you look at TreVeyon Henderson, he's stepped up. He's playing just as well in the last half of the season. And I think those are some of those differences that you see when you watch Ohio State over the last 6 weeks of the year and how they adapted to losing those linemen.
Yeah, they did it. Yeah, like you mentioned, they did it. That's an interesting point about Donovan Jackson because, man, you got to go on the fly, right? Because I think the first game, when they were without Josh Simmons at left tackle, I think it was that first game was against Nebraska, right? And Nebraska's defensive line had a heyday. Let's just put it that way with Zen Mikulski over there at tackle, who's I believe in the transfer portal now, by the way. And then after that, and that was the big wake up call. It's like, oh man, we got a problem. we got a problem. We got to figure this thing out on the fly. Because you mentioned, you get after a Saturday game, and then once you get to the beginning of the next week, you're like, hey, we got to start preparing for blank team, whoever you got next on the schedule when you don't have a bye. So now when you have that 3 weeks, you're able to, Donovan Jackson specifically, right? He's able to kind of maybe learn the position a little bit more, take a little bit more time, work with some of the position coaches, work with all of the coaches to be able to learn that a little bit better right now. So I think that time that you mentioned was certainly big for the offensive line. And, the offensive line, because Tennessee, that Tennessee game, everybody talked about, James Pierce and that front seven. And hey, and a lot of, maybe not just me, but a lot of national people were saying that, hey, maybe it's a little bit of an area for concern, and Tennessee was going to win that battle up front. But I think Ohio State proved in that first round game that their offensive line is fairly solidified. Now, of course, it would be better if you had Jackson at guard and Simmons at tackle and Seth McLaughlin at center, right? You had the whole crew. But Carson Hinsman has started some games before. He's now the center in place there. He started some games last season. I think he's kind of learned from maybe his mishaps last year, and he's taken that experience and kind of learned from it, and he's been better at center. And then, of course, this really shows a lot, to maybe people at the next at the next level, where Jackson, like you said, All-American guard, he flips over to tackle. He's playing pretty good football there. So he's kind of got some flexibility that could maybe attract some people at the next level. But the matchup in terms of this game, in terms of the Rose Bowl, that's very interesting to me, is indeed this Ohio State offensive line. The last time we saw Oregon's defensive line on the field, Penn State rushed for nearly 300 yards in that game. And I thought that was a matchup in the Big Ten championship game that Oregon could – I'm not saying that they would win it convincingly, but I at least thought that they could create a stalemate, create maybe a tougher challenge for Penn State to be able to run the football. So I think that's a unit certainly for Oregon that needs to step up. You need to get pressure on Will Howard. You need to try to find a way to slow down this run game, right? You need to shorten the amount of time that Will Howard has back there to throw, because we saw it in Tennessee. If he's got time, if he's got protection, if he can throw the ball, they got the athletes on the perimeter to certainly make the plays down the field.
Yeah, and I think the other thing they did right is understanding, hey, throw it up, because you're going to get a pass interference call, a very good chance, even if you don't complete the ball. Throw it up there. Let them force the refs to make the play, to make the call, and they did, and it went their way even when they didn't catch the ball. Drew, I think you'll speak well to this, talking about the difference in the Oregon defense. I know they did not play well against Penn State. That was not the defense we've seen all season. But the thing that Oregon has coming into this game they didn't have in October is Jordan Burch. I think having three quality rush guys, Jordan Burch, Mateo Uyunglele, and Tatum Tuioti, I think when you have three, that changes some of the things you can do, because you can still continue to rush with four guys and not have to throw the house at them and use different coverages. And Drew can probably testify better about the specific coverage plans that Oregon could use to deal with guys like Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka and the guys that they have. Carnell Tate, I think, has played well in the second half of the season also. He's had a better second half than he did first half, mainly because, if you're going to focus on those two guys, I'm going to find my third guy. And I think they've done a good job of that. And I think G. Scott has had a pretty good second half as well at tight end. So they've done a good job finding other guys when people try to take away Jeremiah Smith. What do you think the Oregon plan would be coverage-wise, Drew?
Yeah, I think you just explained it just right. But I think with the guy, like I said, they have so many weapons. You barely have the A+ wide receivers in the NFL, let alone at the college level. And so you tell me they got, three guys that you got to be worried about. It scares me. I think you just have to choose your spots. I know sometimes you throw a safety on some double coverage on Jeremiah Smith, maybe on some third downs, not every play. And there's going to be some times that Jabbar Muhammad's going to have to be manned up with him, and that's going to be the matchup, and it's going to be may the best man win. Jeremiah Smith reminds me so much of Julio Jones. I've said it so much. He's big, he's fast, he's powerful. powerful. He can track the ball really well. They're doing a better job of just getting the ball in his hands the last couple games and just watching him run. So I would say that's the biggest thing. You got to pick and choose your spots when you're going to double him, when you're going to roll some coverage to him. If he's to the boundary, and they've been doing a better job hiding him as well, putting him in the slot. So you really have to show what you are as a defense. And so that really puts us in a bind. But like you said, when you can get a rush and some pressure with four guys and not have to blitz, you can do things like that and spread your coverage across to give you a better chance to be successful and not get burned by the big play.
Yeah, and I think obviously you also have to worry about the run and what they can do with two really good running backs. And so you can't always use linebackers to be blitzing for the pass blitz. So you can do different things with them to get them to the running back, which may help on occasion. But I don't know that you want to be sending these guys out of position, because if you looked what went wrong against Penn State, angles. Oregon had bad angles everywhere all game long. I know there's words out there that maybe the team had a flu bug running around through them. I don't know if that's true. If it was, it still didn't play angles, because I watched Jacoby Savage play that he just missed. He came up and it looked like he was going to make a big hit on the receiver, and he just missed. And that is, I don't know why all of a sudden the angles became a problem, but they did. And maybe they were reading keys wrong. Maybe they thought when they do this particular route, this is where he goes, and oops, he didn't go there this time, and you missed the play. But they missed angles a lot, and you cannot do that against Ohio State, because what the Michigan receiver took for a 15 to 18 yard gain, Jeremiah Smith's going to take to the house. You can't miss those guys. You've got to make sure. And I think for me, if I was going to say a key to the game for the Oregon defense, tackle. You have to make tackles. You cannot miss tackles. You have to be really solid in your tackling. Even if it's a 12-yard gain, you make the solid tackle to keep it from being a 30-yard gain or a touchdown. Those are the things. And if you get your angles right and you tackle well, at least you're keeping everything in front of you, and you're forcing them to succeed in the red zone. And then you take your chances. That's the bend don't break defense philosophy. I know people don't like it, but sometimes that's what you've got to do when you've got that much talent on offense. You can't just always be blitzing and always be getting 10 sacks like you did against Washington. That's just not going to happen. Will Howard is, one, he's big and strong. He's going to get out of some of those tackles. And two, he's got a better line in front of them than Washington had for Demond Williams. So I think for me, that's the defensive key. Offensively, I don't think anybody stopped Oregon this year. Penn State sure as heck didn't. And that would have been the second best defense that Oregon's played to Ohio State. So, but they're going to have to do things different. They're not going to be able to do things the same as they did in the first game, because Ohio State was there. They know what they need to do differently as well. They know we can't give up big, huge chunk plays to Evan Stewart down the sideline with Denzel Burke and man coverage out there. We know we've got to do something different. They're going to throw some different coverages that Oregon's not expecting, and Dylan Gabriel's going to have to adjust to that. Drew, what do you think? I think one of these surprise players, Traeshon Holden, he's got his own redemption game going right now, because he got booted out of that game after his 32-yard catch for a personal foul for spitting. And you and I all know nobody ever spits at another person without something having been said. I don't know what it was. It doesn't justify what happened, but something was said, and he's got his own redemption game. And I think if you try to take away Evan Stewart, you try to take away Tez Johnson, you're going to leave something open, and that's Traeshon Holden. And he showed what he can do over the middle several times this year with big plays over the middle. And I think, to me, that's a key, is if they're taking away those chunk plays on the outside, they're going to leave something open in the middle. And that's where I think Terrence Ferguson, Kenyon Sadiq, and Traeshon Holden are really valuable for Oregon.
I agree with you there. I was going to say, as you were talking about Traeshon Holden, just from what I've seen in the Big Ten game, with a lot of the stuff we did, a lot of the window dressing and flash we put on those tight end passes and releases out into it as we got their eyes caught in the backfield. I think Ferguson and Sadiq will have a big game, especially Ferguson. He's had a real quiet season. I know he was out a little bit with the injury, but it's really hard. You got those guys who are really athletic. They're not wide receivers, but they're not 100% tight ends. They're just real hybrid guys. I think you do some things where, Jordan James had around 25 carries the last time that matchup happened. I could see them trying to make sure that he doesn't get as much as he did last time. And anytime you do that, you just need the eye to get the eyes of the linebackers or the outside defensive end, just get their eyes for a second, and you can outflank them with some tight end action.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, I like Kenyon Sadiq. And it's the first time I talked about this matchup. I said, hey, watch out for those tight ends. Watch out for those. I think Terrence Ferguson had a pretty decent game on October 12th in this game, but I look at Kenyon Sadiq and I'm like, that's something where I'm like, when everybody's focused on like Tez in the slot, and of course we know about you guys were talking about Trayshawn Holden, of course, over there. Evan Stewart, who had a really big game, who led Oregon in receiving the last two times these two teams match up. I look at Kenyon Sadiq, especially when you get, towards the red zone, definitely like inside the 35-yard line. You saw what Oregon was able to do in that Big Ten championship game, finding Kenyon Sadiq for those two touchdowns where they were able to get on the board. He's such a great weapon in the red zone, and it's very difficult. It's, Caleb Downs versus him is a very interesting matchup because we talked about, Thieneman in terms of covering tight ends and how is Ohio State going to cover some of these tight ends in this game as well. And then, I was just talking about Sadiq, and if you put Sadiq and Ferguson on the field at the same time, good luck with that. See how you want to. One of those guys maybe has to be covered with the linebackers, and we all know that's a mismatch for both of these guys in this particular contest as well. It's interesting when Ohio State's defensive backs, obviously Oregon had a really good game against them. They were able to throw. We mentioned Evan Stewart getting some big plays down the field. You guys mentioned the big catch from Trayshawn Holden, certainly as well. And then even though Ohio State ran Indiana off the field, look at that first drive of the game when Indiana was able to drive the football down the field. They were attacking the corners. Davison Igbinosun is one of the most penalized corners in the entire country, right? And they attacked him, got some free yardage there, and they were able to make it into the end zone. We all know how the rest of that game certainly turned out. But that's just one specific example of being able to attack these corners. But obviously that's something that Oregon did before. So you got to think Ohio State's going to be ready for it. That kind of goes back to Scott's points. It's just like, hey, we've put 60 minutes of tape out there, and we're obviously not going to do the same thing, right? Teams are going to be ready for this. Right. So what is Oregon going to do differently? But they're not just going to get away from what they do just because they did it against Ohio State on October 12th. So it's an interesting hybrid. It's an interesting combination to certainly see how they want to approach this. Ohio State, of course, really good in terms of the defensive line in the interior with Ty Hamilton, as well as Tyler Williams, certainly as well. So it's going to be a little bit, maybe a little bit difficult to run the football up the middle. So a little bit of variety from Will Stein. And here's one thing I will say. You talk about tackling in space, and maybe I was getting a little bit frustrated watching towards the end of the Big Ten title game when Oregon was throwing a lot of those screen passes. Penn State was doing a really good job tackling in space. Is Ohio State? I'm very curious to see how many times that's going to be called by Will Stein, because they didn't, to my knowledge, I don't know if they had maybe one or two successful screen passes. Certainly there were more that were maybe unsuccessful than successful. So I'm very curious to see if they're able to do that, because Ohio State has some guys that can certainly tackle in the open field. I've got Lathan Ransom, Caleb Downs, we all know about him. So that's something I'm really curious on. This game really circles back to me. There's a lot of points that I talked about on October 12th that I'm kind of circling back to for this matchup. Who's going to generate the most explosive plays? Right, we saw the explosive plays last week by Ohio State against Tennessee, and that was really their bread and butter to their success down the field. And of course, we know in this first meeting, Oregon was able to generate explosive plays down the field. So, which set of defensive backs is going to prevent them? Of course, the pass rush certainly goes into that as well. That's what I talked about with the pass rush. You got to get home, because I feel like if Will Howard, after that performance against Tennessee, they got a lot of confidence. And if Will Howard has time to throw, I got a feeling that they could maybe have a pretty good day. So this is when it's such a matchup game. And you guys kind of mentioned, hey, they need to be able to maybe do certain things to find that one play. All it takes is one, just a couple of single play situations to put 21 points on the board. So of course, from a coaching perspective, you want to do certain things to be able to set up that situation. Who's going to take advantage of that situation? Is it going to be your old buddy Chip, or is it going to be Will Stein? It's such a chess match, which is what makes this game so much fun.
And I'll let Drew comment on this after I say what I think I've seen most of the season. I think there's still some stuff left in the bag for Will Stein. And when I say that, the screen pass has been a big, huge part of 13 straight games. And I haven't seen a ton of the fake screen. Not necessarily a fake screen, but you make it look like a screen, and then you go, and then as soon as those guys play the screen, you have somebody leaking out. I haven't seen a lot of wheel routes. I haven't seen a lot of the other ways to beat these defenses that come up on those bubble screens. I think those are still out there without it going into the trick plays. I think you have a lot of things that he has left in the bag because he hasn't needed them. What they did, like you said, Ted, to Ohio State, is they went down the field and they challenged those corners in the first matchup. I don't know that they're going to be able to have the same game plan and be successful this time. Drew, what do you think other ideas? Because I don't think they're just going to keep just throwing those bubble screens all day long against Ohio State. They just can't.
Yeah. And then when we talk about having a good defense and good defensive ends that can rush the passer, you got to make those guys make a decision. So you do some RPO where you're pulling the tight end out the back end on a small arrow route, and you put him against, Dylan Gabriel, where there's still a flat route to cover. So everybody's eyes have to be in the right place. But I'm a real big fan of Will Stein, and as you know, once you go through the year, once you get into these playoffs and the bowl games, that's really the time to empty everything you have. There's no, you don't know if there's another game next week. And then also you're just really just trying to say, hey, we've waited all year to run this. We've put in a lot of this formation, and guys know we usually run this play out of this formation. And so now that's the time where you have those plays where you do a fake screen and go, where your guys are blocking and release, or where you might have a double pass or something like that. But now's the time. And especially in a game like this where you go back and you self-scout the last game from October 12th, and you say, okay, well, we did this and we had some success with it. What else can we do off of that? Those are the things coaches really get paid to do, is to do things like that in this game. But they're some of the smartest people in the world when it comes to X's and O's as well.
And I think the analysts are really going to get paid well for this, because those are the guys that have been sitting there, not just self-scouting themselves, scouting what would we do different this time? And has Ohio State faced that same concept, and how have they done against that concept? And that chess match in your own mind as you're developing a game plan, the things that you're thinking, I've self-scouted. Now I'm going to look at Ohio State. Have they faced what I think is our next option? Have they faced that, and how did they respond to that? And then how do we make sure that we are successful in that idea that maybe Ohio State has stopped before? Those are the things where this depth of analysts that are existing in the elite programs now, that's where these things make a difference, is how they get a game plan ready for this kind of a game where, one, the two teams have already met. They've got a couple of common opponents, so they've seen a lot of the same things, and they've reacted a lot of the same ways. So how do they change it in a way that still fits their identity? Oregon is not going to they're not going to just line up and say, we're going to run straight up the middle, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. That's not what they're going to do. They're still going to throw the ball a lot, and they're going to do it out of the RPO, like you say, with Dylan Gabriel. And they're going to see, do they leave some open running lanes? Because if you looked at the Tennessee game, the one thing that they really struggled with was Nico running with the ball. Whether it was designed runs or scrambling, they struggled. And that is there. And, Dylan Gabriel had a big run against Ohio State in the first matchup, the 28-yard touchdown. That is still there. And so will they leave that open? And if they don't, what else did they have to leave open to stop that from happening? And that's where having Dylan Gabriel in his sixth year is so much more valuable than a guy like Nico, who is tremendously talented, but he's a sophomore, and he doesn't have the 63 or 64 starts that Dylan Gabriel has. He hasn't seen everything like Dylan has. And I think that is where the matchup is fascinating, because Will Howard's got a lot of starts too, right? He may not have been at a premium school for passing because he was at Kansas State before, but he's started a lot of games. He's seen a lot of defenses. He's done a lot of different things. And that part is going to be fascinating to watch. I will be there, so I'll be watching it from the press box, and it sometimes it takes away because I don't get all the angles, but it's going to be a fascinating matchup to watch. I think, man, it's so hard to say, because who is going to run the ball still might determine who wins this game. It still might come down to the old-fashioned who gets more yards on the ground versus who passes for more yards. And I think, the one thing I like about what Oregon's done is Noah Whittington over the second half of the season has gotten better. His recovery from the injury, his mind, the mindset on the recovery. That's the biggest thing. Physically, he knew he was right at the beginning of the year. It took him a while, I think, to really be ready mentally for what was happening. The first hit, the first time you had to take a hard cut that you weren't expecting. All those little things where finally it all came together. And I thought the second half of the season he played really well. That gives both teams two really good running backs. So I think this is just, I can't see it being a blowout either way. I think we're going to see another last possession type game. I think it's going to be one of those games where it's going to be, I don't want to say a shootout, but I would pick the over just because I think you're talking about the Rose Bowl and you're talking about two teams that have really good offensive minds running these programs. Kind of big picture, what do you guys think you see for this week?
Yeah, I think when I look at, like, you mentioned Dillon Gabriel right now, and I feel like in this type of scenario, right? Because in a big game scenario, especially when it's a rematch, like we've been talking about, when you've seen this team already, it comes down to execution and executing in these fourth quarter situations. And we've seen Dillon Gabriel come up big in big situations. Of course, you go back to the Ohio State game, making plays in Penn State, even when, of course, it was mostly the defense in that game against Wisconsin, but they still found a way to win. It's just Oregon has just found ways to win with Dillon Gabriel. You look at that loss to Michigan, 2 interceptions from Will Howard in prime scoring position for Michigan, certainly in those situations. I tend to maybe favor Dillon a little bit because, man, we've seen so many Rose Bowls over the year. You guys over on the West Coast and here in the Midwest, certainly. I mean, we've seen so many of these things come down to the wire. And it all comes down to big-time players making big-time plays in this big-time game. And I just think right now I tend to favor Dillon Gabriel in that specific type of situation. I don't know. That's just kind of what my gut is telling me. And I feel like that's kind of what I've seen on the field so far. I really like where you were going with the run game, certainly as well with Noah. Second half of the season, I think it really started with that Illinois game, right, where he just puts his shoulder down to a guy right at the goal line. And he feel like he certainly got his mojo back, certainly the rest of the season. And now you've got a true 1-2 combination with Jordan and Noah back there as well. And then, man, that Dillon pulling the ball on a possible run. You mentioned that run against Ohio State earlier in the season against Oregon State. I think he pulled it from in their own territory, and he kind of went off for a big time run as well. That's like when we talk about setting things up, right? You hold on to a play and you hold on to a certain concept for the whole year where if Oregon is running the football well and Whittington's doing good, James is establishing something, and all of a sudden they Ohio State commits to that. Pull the ball at the last second. It just comes down to these one little itty bitty situations in terms of execution. But I tend to maybe favor Oregon a little bit because I think Dillon has just been able to make those types of plays in big time situations. He's seen so much football. It's certain, and I agree with you. I do not foresee this. I think it would be surprising to me if this game is more than 2 touchdowns. I'd be borderline shocked if this is more than a 14-point spread, maybe even 10 points. Really, when all is said and done, I think these two teams are that close right now.
I wish I could afford the licensing rights to do it because we could come up with a Cool Hand Luke combo picture for Dillon Gabriel in the Oregon uniforms, because I think that's perfect. And you talked about just what he's done this year, but if you look back at what he did for Oklahoma against Texas last year, He is Cool Hand Luke. He just finds ways to win in big games. And it's not just this season. It's before he got here to Oregon. And I think I really like that about him. I'm not going to make a pick today just because I'm saving it for my Tuesday article, but I think I do like it's going to be a close game. And it's really that 2.5 point spread. It's there for a reason. I do want to address, I've seen people talk about motivation, and Drew, you can talk to me about this. I don't think a player ever looks at a Vegas spread and says, I feel disrespected by Las Vegas, and we're now motivated more to play this game. If you're not motivated to win a playoff game and you need a Vegas spread to do it, you're going to lose the game. You should not need that, right, Drew? I don't think, did you ever care about what Vegas said about your games?
No, I didn't. I wasn't even aware of it at that point. So I wish I could say something there, but I was like, a spread. What is that? What is that? Something they put on a bagel, right? But no, usually more times than not, it was coaches telling us that. But even as I looked at the spread today, and I'm like, dang, so they don't even believe the number one team in the country is going to pull this out, who has no blemishes on their record yet. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind. Like you said, it's the playoffs. You're playing this team that people said it was a fluke for Oregon, that you won the first time, or that you got away with one, from what I've heard from, a lot of Ohio State fans and things like that. So beating a team twice, pretty much solidifies what other people are saying in the doubters. So I think that's motivation enough.
And I will go with one more comment about, there's the saying that it's tough to beat a team twice in the same season. Statistically, that's not true. What is tough to do is beat a team that's better than you twice in the same season. So we will find out who the better team is based on this game, I think. Because if you're the better team, winning this game twice in the same season is not that difficult. Just ask Washington a year ago. Mm-hmm. They were the better team last year. Whether Oregon fans want to admit that or not, they were better. They beat Oregon both times by the same amount, in the same way, in the same fashion, beating the defensive backs down the field. That's how they beat Oregon last year. There's a reason Oregon went and got Kobe Savage and Brandon Johnson and some other guys this year. They needed to shore up that defensive backfield, and they did. And Jabbar Muhammad from Washington. So, I know the adage is out there and people believe it, but I've looked at the stats and it's not true. It's hard to beat a team that is better than you twice in the same season. That is true. So Ohio State's going to find out, do they think Oregon is better than them? If Oregon is better than them, they will win. And saying that it's difficult to do, I don't think it's true, but it's going to be a close game, because either team winning this game is not going to be, like you said, Ted, it's not going to be a 10-point spread. It's going to be under a touchdown, I think. And it's going to be one of those things where maybe the last team with the ball wins the game. And maybe, it may not sit well with Will Howard the last game, but it's going to have to be something that he deals with, because it could come down to a last drive again. And will Oregon play defense better than they did? I actually thought it's too bad they took that penalty on the 12 men in the game, because Jabbar Muhammad played really good defense on that pass, and it would have been fourth down without the 5-yard penalty. Yeah, you would have had 4 more seconds, but it's fourth down 5 yards further back. I like Oregon's chances there, because they weren't in field goal range yet. So that was something that I thought was too bad they had the penalty. Maybe that only happened because they had 12 men on the field. I don't think so, but it's going to come down to, I think, last possession. And I think it's going to be a fascinating game to watch. It's going to be a lot of fun in a lot of ways, but it's also going to be one of those that, it's a lot easier to write a story about a blowout. I have the story ready at the end of the third quarter. All I got to do is hit publish. This game, it's not going to be so easy, but I think that makes it really fun. For everybody watching at home, this, I think, will be a really fun game. Those people in the stands, it's going to be a really fun game. It's just one of those things that I think these are the moments you live for if you're a college football fan.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the spread. Yeah, that's going to be the motivating factor. The motivating factor is Dan Lanning. If we've seen anything, if we learned anything from the great product of Scott Anderson and his video team and Ducks versus them, Dan Lanning is a master motivator. Right. And he's going to have this team ready to play, whether they're playing Montana State next year, whether they're playing Oregon State or Wisconsin, no matter who they play. He's going to craft a message, certainly, for this game. I can't wait. I certainly can't wait to see it. So that's going to be, he's going to have these guys ready to play. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He finds certainly that little thing, that little token to be able to get these guys ready to play. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Who can kind of maybe contain these emotions right away? We kind of saw that in the playoff game between Indiana and Notre Dame. Quarterbacks throwing picks right away, and people just feeling antsy, right, in this big type of atmosphere. But hey, Howard and Gabriel, they've been here before. I think they're going to be fine. But who can kind of settle into this boxing match, this heavyweight fight, certainly right away and get it done. But yeah, it's going to be a great time. Have a good time, certainly, in Pasadena. That is certainly the grand. They call it the granddaddy for a reason. So it should be a good time.
It will be. And we'll do a shout out real quick to Carl Holmes, because I know he's the one that gets a lot of the reading part of this for Dan Lanning. He does a lot of the research into some of this stuff. And I think that Lanning's given him a lot of praise, and he's a really good guy, and he is really well versed, and he knows what he's doing as well, helping Lanning create those messages for the team. And there's messages we don't hear. A lot of what we hear is well crafted. There's other things we don't hear that is a part of the message to that team, and I think those are the things that really carry a lot more weight, because it's what you don't hear that drives the team. What you hear is what drives fans, and we know that. What you don't hear is what drives the team and the players. So I think Carl Holmes deserves a lot of credit, and a lot of other analysts. I don't know all the different analyst names because Oregon has, several dozen. So I can't name them all. Carl's a good guy. I think it's going to be the Ducks versus them will be interesting if there's a win. It will be interesting to watch a second one. I don't know if they'll do it after a loss. They didn't last year, but it will be interesting to watch, I think, after this game. Drew, any final thoughts?
Nah, just when you have a game like this, even though I think it's going to be high scoring, I think the game starts out slow. I think both teams come out trying to just like a chess match a little bit, see what you do when I do this, see how you check to this, see how you line up against this. But I think the team that wins time of possession and the most successful team on third down wins the game. And I think the way to keep an explosive offense on the field is to keep their defense on the field. So that's why I think time of possession is the key to this Rose Bowl.
I agree. That's a great point.
Yeah, time of possession, running the football, establishing the line of scrimmage. It wouldn't be Big Ten versus Big Ten if we didn't talk about that. Certainly, right? And it's we've seen some turnovers from Will Howard certainly at key points this season. Hasn't really happened much of late, but we did see it a little bit in the red zone from Dillon Gabriel. I know it's cliche, I know it's something, but it's turnovers, right? When you have two offenses that can certainly go back and forth, if you can take away a possession and add a possession for your team in this type of matchup game where you go back and forth, that even one turnover is absolutely gigantic. So maybe it is only a single turnover, but if you can certainly get that, it can certainly sway things in your momentum. So can't wait. This is going to be a good one. This is old school, man. And there's so much change in college football now, and I know it's a little bit different, Big Ten versus Big Ten, but it's kind of a little bit of a nostalgic type of taste when you have this playoff feeling. Hey, it's the first of its kind, and you've got so much newness. We always kind of circle back to tradition, and that's what we get with the Ducks and the Buckeyes at the Rose Bowl.
I think my final thought is I watched what Josh Connerly did against probably the best defensive end he's going to face all year. And I know that Penn State fans will tell you he held every single play. That's not true. I rewatched most of his pass rushes, and there was only one time where it was even close, but Connerly had his hands inside, and they're just not going to call it if you don't extend where he had his hands in that case. He did a fantastic job. If the Oregon offensive line handles the Ohio State defensive front the way they did Penn State, they're in good shape because they created lanes against a really good defensive front. Do they have a second edge rusher that's good like Jack Sawyer and the JT Tuimoloau? No, but they did such a fantastic job that if they play at that level, I think Oregon is in fantastic shape. If they're able to keep Dillon Gabriel clean, keep his back clean, and if they can get to Will Howard, those are kind of two other things I think. Quarterback play. If the quarterback is clean, they're going to be in really good shape. And that's going to go to the offensive line. And then we're going to see if that offensive line really got a lot of stuff figured out in that 3 weeks for Ohio State, or if Tennessee didn't figure things out defensively and what that line looks like. Because if I'm Oregon, if I'm Tosh Lupoi, I challenge the edges because I think there's still some gaps there for getting to Will Howard.
Well said.
All right. I think we have covered it pretty well. Anything else you guys want to say?
No, just a pleasure meeting you, Big Ten Ted. Heard a lot of good things about you. I tuned in here and there, so keep doing great things, and appreciate just even having this year to do this with you, Scott.
I appreciate you guys both. Ted, it's always great to talk to you. I love having you on. We will keep doing this. I just started the podcast at the beginning of this season. It's one of those things where it's what we need to do to help promote our content. So for those of you that do get to watch this, don't forget to subscribe, ducksportsauthority.com. Go to our YouTube channel. We put this podcast on there every single week. We skipped last week just because Oregon didn't play and we wanted to take a week off, but we do this every single week. during the football season. I will do this during basketball season, baseball season. I think it's important for everybody to get there. So go to our YouTube channel for Duck Sports Authority, subscribe, click the links, get the notifications. If you're interested in more depth in our content, and we're going pretty in depth in some of our offensive and defensive analyses this week. Subscribe, ducksportsauthority.com. We are out there. We do tons and tons of content every week. A lot of detailed analyses. I'm going to even look at the comparison of Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon, the three teams, because that's, I think, the best teams each have faced, and they've common opponent now. And I'm going to look at that and kind of see if there's some analytical tools that I can look at for looking at what I see. Anyway, I appreciate you guys both showing up today. I really appreciate the depth of knowledge, especially from Ted on Dylan Thieneman and Theron Johnson. That's great to have somebody who's seen them play a lot and who knew them before they entered the transfer portal and knew who they were. I think, how do we know at Oregon who Theron Johnson is? We haven't seen him yet. And so you sort of see a guy who watches Northwestern right now. They weren't good enough for us to watch this year. And I think I really appreciate the knowledge you guys provide. And we will hopefully be having a reaction video next week. We'll be talking hopefully about the next step for one of these teams, right?
I'm sure we will.
All right, guys. I appreciate your time.